What sort of country are we where towns and cities are overrun by violent offenders? What sort of country won't acknowledge the reason for these problems for fear that it might cause some offence? What sort of country are we where courts will not allow the adoption of a boy who's been living with the same foster parents for 16 years on racial grounds? Well, the answer to these questions is that we're a country in denial. Too many, entrusted with making decisions on behalf of the rest of us, do not want to see the truth. Instead, they'd rather pretend everything is sweet and just by a bit more tinkering around the policy edges, everything will be fixed. It's an absurd proposition, but it's a common one by our political elites. Now, what I haven't mentioned yet is that the issues I'm referring to directly involve Aboriginal people. Not exclusively, and not all of them by any stretch, but it is a truth that many prefer wasn't acknowledged. Now, take the case of the 18-year-old Indigenous man. He's been cared for by the same foster parent since he was 2. And it was only when he turned 7 that he discovered, and they discovered, that he had some Aboriginal ancestry. Now, apparently that changed everything. Not from the boy's perspective, mind you, or from the foster parent's perspective, but it changed everything from the law's perspective. You see, the problem is the foster parents are white, and the law says that as a first preference, an Aboriginal child is to be adopted by someone in the Aboriginal community to which their birth parent belongs. Now, it doesn't matter that the child was raised and kept safe by white people for 16 years. It doesn't matter that the young man wants to take his parents' name and become their adopted son. It doesn't matter that he's now 18 and can legally make his own decisions. And in making a legal application to be adopted, the young man told the courts, and I quote, "It's getting to the point where I feel like no one is listening to me. I understand that I have Aboriginal heritage in my blood, and I will identify with my culture as I please. This shouldn't be something that should hold up my adoption. For the last 16 years, Mum and Dad have been saying the same thing on behalf of me, and I've been saying for myself for the last 9 years, yet nothing has changed." Note the man said he'll identify with his culture as he pleases. Well, incredibly, in this age of identity politics, his cultural identity is being made for him. In this instance, he doesn't have a choice. This is an absurd situation, and it's brought on by a bunch of do-gooders who have no idea about what is best for children. Here's Peter Dutton responding to them when prompted by an ABC journalist today.
With respect, that's such an ABC question. Do you live locally? I mean, do you speak to people on the streets? Do you hear what it is they're saying to you? I mean, do you believe...
I live locally.
You live locally? You don't believe there's any problem here?
No, I'm asking you, what evidence do you have that there is...
Well, I've spoken to the police and the social workers, some of whom are out on stress leave at the moment because of the scenes that they've endured. They have kids taking them back into homes where they've been sexually assaulted and 6-year-olds grabbing onto their legs, screaming not to be left there. So they're the people who are on the front line. I don't know what the academics are saying. I don't know what the bureaucrats are saying. I can tell you, though, what the human experience is on the front line. And if the ABC and others don't see fit to report that, then frankly, I think it reflects more on the ABC than it does on the locals here. And I don't think you're doing your job if you're denying the reality of the circumstances on the ground.
That was my favourite bit of politics that I've seen in years. This is the leadership that Australia needs. No more mealy-mouthed pussyfooting around. Identify the real problem and then call out the bureaucrats and the politicians who want us to live in denial and live in denial themselves. There are a similar batch of bureaucrats and politicians who pretend the violence and crime that is destroying places like Alice Springs and Townsville isn't centred around Aboriginal youths from largely dysfunctional families. Or that this dysfunction often stems from sit-down money, alcohol and drug abuse, and a system that seems to pick and choose when to enforce the law. But I have to say it's not just Alice Springs and Townsville. We've got pockets of drunken dysfunction all over the place. In my home state of South Australia, you just have to go to Port Lincoln and talk to the locals there. Or I see it firsthand every day here in Adelaide. We've got groups of people that have been causing problems on our streets for years and nothing has been done about it. That is until last week, of course. See, last week there was this special meeting where licensed venue operators in the City of Adelaide were called in and advised of a 4-week trial banning 4 and 5 litre cask wine sales and limiting spirit sales to individuals. Well, the 4-week trial just happens to coincide with the Gather round of AFL, where it's all being played in Adelaide this week, and the Live Golf Tournament, which are both bringing tens of thousands of tourists to our city. It's a clean-up cover-up, similar to the one that was just done before the Prime Minister popped into Alice Springs to pretend he genuinely cared about the problems there. Well, frankly, this type of approach is pathetic. Pretending a problem doesn't exist or hiding it away when convenient will not change anything in the long run. Openly discussing the real issues at play are the only way to start to resolve them. And trust me, there are some serious issues that need to be addressed in this country. And in the case of redressing Aboriginal disadvantage, it's not a case of more money. More than $30 billion is funneled that way every single year. And it's not a case of creating a new body of Aboriginal elites or using the Constitution to divide this country by race. Instead, we need to insist that all Australians are treated equally before the law, and that we, as a society, have behavioural expectations that need to be upheld by everyone. And until those standards are applied to all Australians, regardless of race or creed or colour, we'll never overcome the problems that so many of our politicians would prefer to ignore.